Most people remember the Twilight Zone for its jaw-dropping twists and its knack for using science fiction to expose the ugliest parts of American life. Rod Serling built a career and won a stack of awards by smuggling sharp social criticism into stories about aliens, ghosts, and parallel worlds. But one particular episode went so far past the line that it didn't just get criticized, it got erased. For more than 50 years, this single half-hour of television was pulled from syndication, left out of marathons, and treated like something the network wanted the world to forget. It wasn't a monster that spooked the executives. It was something a lot closer to home. So, what was this episode? And what did it do that was bad enough to keep it off the air for half a century? To understand that, you first have to understand the man who made the show and the industry he was constantly at war with. The Twilight Zone premiered on October 2nd, 1959, and for 5 seasons it pulled audiences into an anthology series unlike anything else on television. Every week brought a new standalone story. A futuristic city, a haunted house, a sleepy street that slowly turned sinister. Nobody knew what they'd get, and that unpredictability became the show's signature. Behind the camera, though, Rod Serling was already a battle-hardened television writer before he became the Twilight Zone's narrator. In the 1950s, sponsors had enormous power over content. If a lighter company paid for airtime, a character couldn't be shown striking a match. If a car manufacturer sponsored a program, rival car logos had to be erased from the background. For a writer who wanted to tackle real human problems, this kind of interference was maddening. Things came to a head when Serling tried to adapt a real-life story about racial violence for television. By the time network standards and sponsors finished editing it, the setting, the characters, and the entire point of the story had been sanded away. That experience taught Serling something important. Censors didn't object to difficult themes. They objected to those themes appearing in a recognizable, present-day American setting. Put the same conflict on an alien planet with green-skinned characters, and suddenly it was just science fiction. His pitch-the-time element, about a man traveling back to warn people about Pearl Harbor, was initially shelved by the network. But when it finally aired, the reaction was strong enough that Serling was handed his own series. From there, the Twilight Zone became his outlet. He was executive producer, head writer in the calm, measured voice narrating every episode. The show also became an early stage for actors who'd later become household names. Robert Redford, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, and a young Ron Howard all passed through it. By the time the series wrapped in 1964, Serling had written close to 100 episodes exploring greed, fear, grief, and the darker corners of the human mind, proving that a compelling story didn't need a big budget, just a sharp premise and a willingness to look at ourselves honestly. Rodman Edward Serling was born on Christmas Day, 1924, in Syracuse, New York, and raised in Binghamton, where his father ran a grocery store. That quiet upbringing ended abruptly when he enlisted in the Army during World War II, hoping to fight in Europe, but instead getting sent to the Pacific as a paratrooper. He came home with a Purple Heart, injuries to his knee and wrist, and psychological wounds that never fully closed. Not long after his return, his father died of a sudden heart attack, a second blow that, by most accounts, shaped much of what he wrote afterward. Nearly every haunted character and every grim twist in his later work traced back, in some way, to what he carried out of the war. After his service, Serling attended Antioch College in Ohio, where he met his wife Carol. Even while working brutal 7-day weeks, he stayed close with his family, his daughter, and has said she never felt the absence of a workaholic father, only the presence of one who was always available to talk. The pace eventually took its toll. Serling suffered a heart attack in May 1975, followed weeks later by a second one while he was at his lake cottage. He underwent open-heart surgery but died on June 28, 1975, at just 50 years old. Off camera, Serling wasn't the somber figure people assumed from his on-screen persona. His daughter has described him as a genuine goof, the kind of person who'd put a lampshade on his head at a party just to get a laugh. He was also generous. When actor Paul Douglas died shortly after filming an episode, Serling personally paid to reshoot scenes with a replacement actor because he felt the original footage wasn't right. For all its acclaim, The Twilight Zone wasn't an instant hit with CBS executives. It was canceled after its 3rd season, largely because sponsors were wary of attaching their names to such unconventional stories, and a network executive who reportedly disliked the show replaced it with a short-lived comedy. When that replacement flopped, the network came back to Serling, but with a catch. Season 4 was stretched from a tight 30 minutes to a full hour, with strained storylines that worked best when compressed. By the time it shrank back to 30 minutes for Season 5, viewership had already drifted, and the show ended for good. The show's emotional backbone, though, traced to something very real. The 1955 murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy killed in Mississippi. Serling wanted to dramatize the case directly, but the network refused every time, afraid of the backlash. That repeated rejection is essentially why the show exists in its final form. Serling concluded that if the networks wouldn't let him address racism and violence head-on, he'd disguise it in stories about aliens and strange other worlds, where the same truths could slip past the censors. Even the show's famous four-note theme has an odd backstory. The original score was written by Bernard Herrmann, the composer behind Psycho and Vertigo, but network executives wanted something else. Looking to cut costs and dodge union fees, CBS's music director found cheap stock cues from a struggling Romanian composer named Marius Constant, who was paid a small flat fee and had no idea his work had become instantly recognizable pop culture until years later. He didn't receive formal credit until the 1980s, and only after suing for it. One of the show's most acclaimed episodes wasn't written for television at all. An occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge had already won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film and taken top honors at the Cannes Film Festival before it ever aired as part of the series. With the show's fifth season budget stretched thin across a large episode order, the production team realized it was far cheaper to license this existing French short than produce a new episode from scratch, a fraction of the usual cost. Set during the Civil War and centered on a man who appears to escape his own execution, the film's eerie, reality-bending tone fit naturally into Serling's universe, even without any of his usual science fiction trappings. Serling himself almost wasn't the show's narrator. Producers originally wanted a professional broadcaster nicknamed the Voice of Doom for his newsreel narration, and even considered Orson Welles before budget concerns ruled him out. When neither panned out, Serling stepped into the role himself, and it became one of the most recognizable voices in television history. Reportedly, there was also an unwritten rule at CBS that only Serling was permitted to use the word God in scripts, a privilege other writers on the show found endlessly frustrating. Long before he played Sulu on Star Trek, George Takei appeared in a Twilight Zone episode called The Encounter, playing a Japanese-American gardener locked in a tense confrontation with a World War II veteran. A cursed samurai sword serves as a catalyst, drawing out both men's buried wartime trauma. Many consider it one of the series' most pointed statements about how war damages people psychologically, but it's also the reason the episode became infamous. The story implied that the gardener's father had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack, a claim that was not only historically baseless, but deeply hurtful to Japanese-American communities, who had already endured the trauma of wartime internment camps. Airing as the Vietnam War was escalating only made the timing worse. The backlash was immediate and forceful enough that CBS pulled the episode entirely, keeping out of reruns and syndication packages for decades. Takei later joked that it was the only episode of the series that never earned him residual checks. It wasn't until a New Year's Day marathon in 2016, 52 years after the original airing, that The Encounter resurfaced. The franchise faced later tragedies, too. In 1982, a helicopter crashed during production of Twilight Zone. The movie killed actor Vic Morrow and two child actors, a disaster that led to lasting changes in film set safety regulations. Even the origin of the show's name carries some mystery. Serling long believed he'd simply invented the phrase, but later suspected he might have absorbed it from his military service. Twilight Zone was reportedly Air Force slang, describing the disorienting moment when a landing pilot loses sight of the horizon. The term had also appeared as early as 1946 in philosophical writing about the space.